His first lover was Tyler, the Creator. We all know he got mad when Tyler, the Creator cheated on him. He got out there and then Will was like, "You're my son, bro. You can have your feelings, but you can't be out here like that." He stopped it, shut it down.
Nobody handed you a manual for growing up in front of the entire world. Nobody tells you what it feels like when your childhood isn't really yours. When every moment, every emotion, every mistake becomes content for millions of people to judge. Because what you're about to hear isn't just another celebrity story. It's not just headlines or internet gossip. This is about a son trying to figure out who he is while living under the shadow of one of the most powerful fathers in Hollywood. People saw the smiles, the red carpets, the interviews where everything looked perfect. They saw Jaden Smith standing next to Will Smith, laughing, joking, looking like the definition of a strong father-son bond.
If your husband was doing things to boys and did stuff to your son and you ain't do shit about it. Bilal told me everything.
But what nobody really saw was what was happening behind that image. The pressure, the expectations, the confusion. And now, as Jaden grows older, speaking in pieces, sharing fragments of his truth, people are starting to look back and ask questions. Not just about fame, not just about parenting, but about identity, about control, about what happens when a child grows up in an environment where the lines between guidance and pressure start to blur. Because this story doesn't start with controversy. It doesn't start with rumors. It starts with a little boy who never really got the chance to just be a kid.
I want to tell you guys something. I want to tell you, Tyler doesn't want to say, but Tyler's my boyfriend, and he's been my boyfriend my whole life. Tyler, the Creator, is my boyfriend. It's true.
Before the world knew his name, before the interviews and headlines, Jaden was just a child born into a family that already had everything: fame, money, influence. His father, Will Smith, wasn't just a movie star. He was a global icon, a man who had built an empire from nothing. And his mother, Jada Pinkett Smith, was just as strong, just as respected, just as powerful in her own way. From the outside, it looked like the perfect setup, a family that had it all. But what people don't always understand is when you're born into that kind of life, you don't get to choose your path. The path is already waiting for you.
Will was like, "You're my son, bro. You can have your feelings, but you can't be out here like that." He stopped it, shut it down.
Jaden didn't grow up like most kids. There were no normal school days, no quiet moments away from attention. Instead, there were film sets, business meetings, and expectations that most adults would struggle to carry. At just a young age, he stepped into Hollywood with The Pursuit of Happiness, acting alongside his father. And for many people watching, it felt heartwarming. A father guiding his son, a bonding experience. But behind that, there was pressure. Because once that movie succeeded, everything changed.
I open the door to Dwayne's dressing room, and that's when I see Dwayne and having it with Will.
Let me process that for a second.
There was a couch, and Will was bent over on the couch, and Dwayne was standing up.
Suddenly, Jaden wasn't just Will Smith's son, he was a rising star, a brand in the making. And with that came expectations that never really turned off. Projects like After Earth weren't just films, they were visions, plans for something bigger. And while Will saw potential, saw opportunity, Jaden was still trying to understand who he even was. Imagine being a teenager and feeling like your life is already mapped out for you, like your identity is something being shaped by everyone else. And that's where things started to shift. Because while the world was watching his career,
ridiculous, right? And it's nonsense. And this is a person that tried a money shakedown that didn't work.
Jaden was going through something much deeper. He was trying to figure out himself, his personality, his beliefs, his identity. And instead of doing that in private, like most people do, he had to do it under a spotlight that never dimmed. What nobody expected was how public that journey would become. As Jaden grew older, he started expressing himself in ways that didn't fit into traditional expectations. His fashion choices, his interviews, the way he spoke about life, about freedom, about being yourself. Some people praised him for it. Others criticized him, but very few stopped to ask why. Why was he so determined to break out of every box people tried to put him in?
Husband was doing things to boys and did stuff to your son and you ain't do shit about it. Bilal told me everything.
Because sometimes when someone pushes that hard to define themselves, it's because they've spent years feeling like they didn't have that control. And then came the moments that really made people pause. Public appearances, interviews where Jaden spoke in ways that felt deeper than just casual conversation, comments about his upbringing, about the pressure, about wanting space, even moments where he joked, or maybe wasn't joking, about wanting to be emancipated as a teenager. At the time, people brushed it off, called it rebellion, called it just a phase. But looking back now, it feels different. Because those weren't just random statements. They were glimpses, small windows into what he might have been feeling all along. And then there's the topic that the internet keeps circling back to, his identity. Jaden has always been open about expressing himself freely, whether it's through fashion, friendships, or how he talks about love and connection. At times, he made headlines for comments about relationships, including his friendship with Tyler, the creator. Some people took those moments seriously, others thought it was humor, but the truth is, Jaden never followed anyone else's rules when it came to being himself. And that's where the conversation often gets twisted, because instead of understanding his journey, people started creating their own narratives, blaming, speculating, trying to connect dots that were never clearly drawn. But here's the reality. Identity isn't something someone else creates for you. It's something you discover over time. And for Jaden, that journey just happened to play out in front of millions of people. Still, that doesn't erase the pressure he faced, because while he was trying to understand himself, he was also dealing with expectations from his family, from the industry, and from the public. And those expectations don't always align. There's a difference between being supported and being shaped, and sometimes that line becomes very hard to see. Over time, even Will Smith himself admitted that he may have pushed too hard, that he made mistakes as a parent, not small ones, but serious ones, the kind that affect trust, the kind that don't just disappear with time. And when a parent admits something like that publicly, it makes people wonder what really happened behind closed doors. Because children don't just wake up one day wanting distance. That feeling builds, slowly, quietly, over years. And in Jaden's case, it seems like that distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. You can see it in the way he talks now, in the way he chooses his words carefully, in the way he expresses himself through art instead of direct statements. It's like he's still processing everything, still putting the pieces together. And maybe that's the most important part of this story. Not the rumors, not the headlines, but the fact that this is a real person trying to heal in real time. Because imagine growing up where your life is constantly being directed, where your success is planned before you even understand what success means, where your identity is questioned, analyzed, and debated by strangers every single day. That doesn't just disappear when you become an adult. It stays with you. It shapes how you see yourself, how you trust others, how you build relationships. And for Jaden, that journey hasn't been easy. There have been moments where he stepped away, moments where he focused on music, on creativity, on building something that felt like his, not his father's, not Hollywood's, his. And maybe that's what all of this has really been about. Not rebellion, not controversy, but independence. The need to finally say, this is who I am, without anyone else defining it. Because at the end of the day, every child, even one born into fame, deserves the chance to figure themselves out on their own terms. And maybe that's what Jaden has been fighting for all along. Now, here's the part that really makes you think. Because when you look at everything, the childhood, the pressure, the expectations, the public moments, it becomes clear that this isn't just one story. It's a series of moments that all connect in ways we're only starting to understand. A father who wanted the best, but may have pushed too far. A son who respected that, but needed space to breathe. A family that looked perfect, but had struggles just like anyone else. And a young man who is still, to this day, figuring out who he truly is. The truth is, we may never get a full, clear explanation. Not everything needs to be said out loud. Some things are understood through actions, through distance, through growth. But one thing is certain. Jaden Smith is no longer that little boy sitting at the table while adults made decisions for him. He's his own person now, and whatever his journey looks like moving forward, it's his to define. So maybe the real question isn't what happened in the past. Maybe the real question is what happens next. Because stories like this don't end with one moment. They evolve, they grow, just like the people living them. And as Jaden continues to speak, whether it's through music, interviews, or quiet choices, the world will keep watching, not just for answers, but for understanding. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about what was done. They're about what someone chooses to become after everything they've been through. And this story, it's far from over. And maybe that's the part people don't talk about enough. Because at some point, the noise fades, the headlines slow down, the opinions stop feeling so loud, and what's left is just a person trying to rebuild themselves, piece by piece. Jaden Smith isn't that confused kid in the spotlight anymore. He's someone who's lived through pressure most people will never understand. He's someone who had to grow up fast, figure things out publicly, and still find a way to stand on his own. And whether you agree with his choices or not, that takes strength. But here's the real truth. This was never just about identity. It was about control, about expectations, about what happens when love and pressure get mixed together in ways that aren't always healthy. And even Will Smith has admitted that not everything was handled the right way. That doesn't make this a story about blame. It makes it a story about growth. Because sometimes the people who shape us the most are also the ones we have to step away from to truly understand ourselves. And now Jaden is doing exactly that, creating his own path, speaking in his own voice, living life on his own terms. So as this story continues to unfold, maybe the focus shouldn't be on what went wrong, but on what comes next. Because the most powerful part of any story isn't the struggle, it's the comeback. And something tells me this is just the beginning.